Welcome to the Enoch Wright House, a state and national historic register site. The headquarters of the Peters Township Historical Society, Museum of Westward Expansion, and a home that was built by a pioneer family that has become a local landmark. Attaining historic register status of a site is a two-phase process under the guidelines and requirements of the Pennsylvania Historical Commission. Phase 1 is to determine if the site is eligible for nomination. Phase 2 is the nomination of the site in thorough documentation that supports the description and significance of the nominated site. The Enoch Wright House met the criteria for nomination and was approved to the state register by the Pennsylvania Historical Commission on March of 2007 and listed on the National Register May of 2007. The Enoch Wright House, the significance rests in Criterion C as a fine example of early 19th century vernacular architecture in western Pennsylvania that reflects no formal style, but embodies a simple yet high quality of design and construction with federal style influences. While many of the details of the house are typical of the area and the period, the design with its matching gable end wings is unusual and very distinctive. It remains virtually the same as it did when constructed by Enoch Wright in 1815. The house, as you look at it from the front, is a rectangular 5-bay central block with 1.5-story symmetrical brick wings attached on the east and west side. The chimneys are low brick at the gable end of the main core and taller at the end wings. The walls are 2 brick deep, reinforced by lath and plaster. The foundation is sandstone and steps to the main central block and the wings are sandstone as well. If you look at the lintels of brick, they're set vertically above all of the windows and also above the semicircular attic windows in the main core. The central portal door is original. It's paneled on the exterior and board and batten on the interior. The interior trim wood in chair rails is incised reed motifs, classical designs in urns, swags, festoons on the fireplace surrounds and mantels, and fluted trim and corner blocks on the doorways. The fireplaces in the house on the 2 gabled end wings are open hearth wood-burning fireplaces, and the ones in the central core are inserted with coal-burning inserts to burn coal. The house is virtually unaltered since it was built by Enoch Wright in 1815 and remains an unusual and distinctive site in our community.
Hello, welcome to the Enoch Wright House, 200 years old. We're going to take a tour today and I'm going to show you, we have turned this place into the history of this area. So in the rooms, not only will I talk about the Wrights, but I will talk about the history of the the history of the place at that time. All right, this is the center hall. This house was built for 2 families. Family's going to live on that side and a family's going to live on that side. Now everything on that side is on this side. They're the same. And I think it's because Enoch knew women. Because he didn't want his mother and his mother and dad, and they were going to live on one side with him, and his and another side was going to be another family member with her kids, and he wanted all the families to have equal space. So you will see that they are equal. This is the main hall, and we go up the steps here, and these steps go all the way up 3 floors to the roof. And there was a trapdoor then. And it was, we don't know why it was there, but you could open the trapdoor. Now, of course, they had a fireplace in every room. So maybe they got sparks on the roof. We don't know for sure. And they could go up and throw water on the roof. Or they could go up and fix something that needed fixed on the roof. But you can no longer get on the roof because we had to put a new roof on, and that is now sealed. So you cannot get up there and go out on the roof. All right, we're going to start in this room over here. In this room, we show that there were 2 layers of brick. On the inside of the house, there's the soft brick, they call it. On the outside of the house, they put the hard brick. Over here, we left a space so you could see, show the soft brick. This is the soft brick. That's on all the walls in the house. And that's why the window ledges are so wide, because we have the 2 layers of brick. Hard brick on the outside, soft brick on the inside. Over here is one of the few things that we have from the Wright, Enoch Wright. And this was his beaver top hat that he wore. So that is one of the few things that we have from him. And every room has a fireplace. Now down here, in the downstairs where company would come in, we have the fancy decorations on the fireplaces. They are decorated. Upstairs, in the rooms upstairs, they're just plain because visitors didn't go up there. But the visitors came in down here, so they had those fireplaces. But every room has a fireplace. So they burned wood at first, and sometimes later they burned coal because the person who lived here owned the coal mines in the area, so they burned coal. But the early days, it would have been wood. All right, we'll move on to another room. This is the kitchen, ladies, one of the kitchens. There's one on the other side also. But this is where you would have prepared your meals. Now remember, there was no electricity at that time. There was no running water. Across this road here, the road wasn't there either, but across the road, there's a beautiful spring, real cold water. So when they made butter or they had milk, whatever they needed to keep cool, they had to take over to the spring house. And they would put their things in something like this. They made these. They fired these, and they made them, and they would put their butter or milk or whatever and take this over to the spring house and put it in the cold water. They also, well, as a woman, you had to do the cooking. Your husband brought the meat home and you did the cooking. Well, the problem that those ladies must have had was being with something like this in the fire. I don't know how I know they must have gotten burned at times because that would catch on so easily. But your fire would be here, and you had this, would go over the fire, and you would have a pot like this, and you could put stuff in here, whether you made soup or whatever, and you can put it in there, and you could have it hanging there all day till dinner time. Also, they had a big pot like this, and they would put, during the day, they would have water in there, and it would be cooking over the fire, and they would throw their leftovers, vegetables, if they had a piece of meat, whatever, they'd throw that all in there, and then that would be their dinner. A lot of wood. Everything was made of wood because they had the trees. Rolling pin, spatula, bowl. There's another thing there. So they had they used a lot of wood. They also used, they would send the children sometimes out to gather sticks, branches from trees like this, and they would make their rake, their broom. Now the broom was very important, not so much for this house, but when they lived in the log cabin, they always kept all the land around a log cabin clear. No grass, no bushes, nothing. And they would go out and sweep it because of snakes. They kept doing that. Or they also wanted to be able to see if any Indians were in the area, so they would keep it bare. Cupboards. There's cupboards in every room in this house. At that time, you were charged a fee for cupboard. You had to pay taxes on those cupboards. But Enoch didn't seem to mind that because he has cupboards in every single room. And I think he was quite wealthy by the time he built this house, so I don't think he cared about that. Also, they made a lot of this pottery because they had the clay. And they could fire and make those pots. The little wooden bowls were used. These are interesting. These are horns. And the horn was used because of the mice. And they would put their spices and things in here to keep it safe from the mice. These metal drinking cups were also made here. They could make those. They made this is interesting, these little baskets. And they put their candles in there, or anything that they didn't want the mice to eat, because the mice would eat the candles, and they needed the candles because they didn't have any electricity. They only had candlelight and firelight. So they would put that. And they made things out of metal. Some of the things that are in these cases are little pieces of things that they found in the ground. It's just little pieces of shells and things and glass that they put in the case, our curator put in the case to show what type of materials they used, but there's really not anything there that's all in one piece. Also in this room we have a checkerboard. This checkerboard was a game that they played. They made their own checkers and they played checkers. The door over here is the original door. You can see it's a little lopsided, but we will not change that door. And thank goodness no one else changed it. So you have to remember that now if you wanted to water, you have to run over to the spring and get your water. For food, your husband better be a good hunter because he brought home the meat. Women cooked it, but he had to bring it home. But the women also had other many jobs, helping with the planting outside. And they had to plant everything, and they had to it must have been a very tight family unit because everybody in the family had to do their part. All right, we'll move on to the next room. What we have done in this house is we have tried not only to show the rights, but the history of this area. And so we have things like this. These were the early traders that came to this area. They weren't here to settle or build houses or anything. They were here to hunt. And they would get the skins, and they would take these back to the coast. And of course, sometimes they were shipped to Britain, probably most of the times. And that's how they made their living. They came and they went. They did not stay. But this is how they dressed. And they had more of a moccasin type than a boot on their feet, because they found out from the Indians that you can go through the woods a lot quieter if you have shoes on like this rather than boots, because if you have boots on, you're clomping and you're breaking branches and things, and they found this was much quieter. So the settlers in this area A lot of them adopted that, and we do have a pair of moccasins over there, but I don't think you'll be able to get to show those. Also, when they went out hunting, or when the people that lived here, like Eric, went out hunting, you would have to take your powder. Now, they wouldn't take this. This is the powder horn that would keep all your powder in this. And you would pour this into a small one, into a small powder horn. And that's what you would take hunting with you. Now, as a hunter, you better be a good shot, because you would get one shot. I don't have a gun to show you, but the gun was one that you had to put everything down in, the powder, the piece of material and everything, pound it all down in, and then you could shoot. Well, if there was a deer standing there and you shot and you missed, you're not going to have dinner that night probably. But they became pretty good shots. They also sometimes used the bow and arrow, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. This is one that you would hit your enemy with, and this would really knock them out. Here we have some bags. This is the type of bag that they would take. This is really old. I don't want to pick it up. But they would take these bags with them to put their powder and their things in that they would need when they were out in the field. We have over here are the tools that they used to build their cabins. This is a saw that they would saw the tree down. Well, you needed two people, because one on one side and one on the other. So you could saw. When the tree got down, then of course you had to scrape all of the bark off of the tree. And they would use something like this. And then you had to cut it into logs, get it into logs. It was a big job, and you needed help doing it. So they usually had people helping them. Okay, over in this corner, we have some things like clay pipes that they made themselves. They got very, very handy at making things, because you couldn't afford to import things from the coast back over the mountains to get here. It would be very expensive. So they became very, very good at making things. And I don't know whether we can see this case down here or not. There's moccasins, and there's the tie that they wore around their neck. They made ropes. They made marbles and games, things to play with. They made combs. They made little dippers out of wood. They were very, very creative and worked very hard. When they first came here, the Indians were here. This was actually the Indian hunting ground. And they used this area just to hunt. They didn't have their villages here. They had those up along the river. But here, they had their hunting ground. And there was everything here. Deer, bear, fox, everything you'd want to hunt. Well, then when the settlers came and they started building these log cabins, that was before this house was built, they built this log cabin, and Enoch Wright lived in a log cabin for many years. I think he was 30 by the time he built this house, and it was his dad and mother that had come here. So he lived in that log cabin for a long time with his family, and he made money. And I guess he finally decided, because his son grew up and he married and had children, and it was getting crowded. So he thought, I better do a house. So he made this house, which was one side for his mother and his dad, and at the other side was for him and his children. So his children. Okay, I think we're ready to move on to the next. Oh, I did want to show you this cannon bow. These are so heavy. But this is what they shot. And there's a bigger one here. And then there's these little things that they could shoot too. But I don't know how they ever shot this thing, because it's so heavy. I don't know how it would go. And I showed that. And so pretty much that's it. They would have these bags that they would take out with them. I Just showed that. All right, I think we're ready to move on to the next room. I usually say when people come here, do you know what this is? Sometimes they do, but most times they don't. Now this is something that they would make because in those days, early days, very early days when they were living in the log cabin especially, there was no sweetener. They didn't have sugar. They didn't have anything to sweeten things. So they could make maple syrup because they're maple trees, or they could make these. Now what this is a bee skep. What they would do, they would send their child out to look for a bee. And you follow the bee and find out where its house is. And when he found the nest, he would mark it, and he would run back and tell his dad, and he would get his people, and they would go out and they would smoke the nest. Now the big thing is you have to get the queen. They'd get the queen and put her in a little box, and they would bring it back and they would put her up in here. And of course then all the bees came. And they would make their hive in here, and they would have their wax and their honey. Well, the only problem with this is in order to get the wax and the honey, you have to open it up. And so they would have to open this up, get the honey, get the wax out that they were going to use for candles, and then they'd have to make another one because they couldn't use this one again. Also, we have over here in this corner, these are some of the things that they made. Combs, wooden bowls. This is like a little duster. Little purses. They made so many things. They were so creative. They also made these lanterns. You put a candle in there. That's a lantern. Now, this is interesting to me because when I first saw this, I thought, why is this rough on the outside and smooth on the inside? And so I asked our curator about it, and he said, oh, that's because of the wind. They'd have a candle in here. Well, when the wind blew, it would be not easy to get in and blow out the candle. Where if it was the smooth side, it would blow the candle out right away. But they used these for light. They used these to make their candles. You had to make the candles. You needed to get the wax, and you put your string in there. You made your own candles. And you needed those because you didn't have any electricity. So that was your only light, were the candles. Let me see, is there anything else? If they were going somewhere, if the ladies were going somewhere, they might use a box like this. They didn't have much to take on a trip. They just would put a few things in that box, a little box, and that's what they would travel with. Let's see, combs. And I did want to mention the fireplaces. They are very nice down here. But upstairs they're plain because this is where the company came, down here. And the cupboards. And in those days you were taxed on cupboards. But Enoch that doesn't seem to bother him. He had many, many cupboards and in the house. All right, I think we're ready to move on to the next one. Since we were doing the history of the area, each room telling about the history of this area, we decided we needed to include the Indians because they were here first. At the beginning, this was their hunting ground. And so we thought we have to have a room where we can talk about the Indians. So over here, we have an Indian, and they wore the furs. They killed the animals and used the furs. They had their bow and arrow, with which they killed animals and got their food. This is a trap for fish right here that they would put in the creek or in the stream to catch the fish. Over here we have something that they would play for fun, for amusement, and I think we still do this today, lacrosse. But that was, the Indians played that. And they had their bows and arrows. They would have some games. They had this little game where they would either hang this in a tree or they would lay it on the ground, and then you had these little corn cob, and you would throw it either through here play a game and see who could get it, or in a circle on the ground. Games. So they had games, and they would make things like this for containers. And also, I wanted to show you this, and I don't know whether I can pick it up. I'll try. This is one of the few things we have of Enoch Wright. Oh, this is a framing hatchet, but how you ever picked it up to frame anything, I don't know. But they would frame with this. It's called a framing hatchet when they were building their log cabins and things. It's very heavy. That's Enoch Wright's framing hatchet. And we have over here, we have the mound builder tools in the bottom of the case here. And we have arrowheads, projectile points they're called, that they used on their arrows, on their bows. And these were all found in the area. And we have some over there, all kinds of tools and stones that they used. It's almost all stones, different types of stones that they used for their arrows, the arrowhead, and for building things. These are all tools at the bottom. This is what we call our costume room, to show how people dressed in those days, like what I have on. And I don't know how they ever did it with tending those fires and cooking over them with these long dresses without catching on fire. But they did it, and you didn't make anything any shorter in those days. So if you go looking around this room, you're going to see some of the things that they wore. A nightgown, a night dress, different dresses, the way they dressed. This little girl right here shows you even what the children would wear. This is what the children wore. And when they went out to play, this is what they had on. They didn't have shorts and things like that. So they had their little hats and aprons, and they played in those. Over here is the men would wear pants that came to their knees, and then they would have socks that came up to the pants, just like over here in the corner. And they would have a jacket of some type of material. They would have a loose, very loose shirt on, because a lot of times they would use the shirt, they would put some of their equipment in the shirt. And they would wear a hat. So this is probably pretty much what they would have on. What I like here are the shoes that the women wore. Now these were expensive, and they probably didn't get very many pair of shoes, so they would take care of them. And a lot of times if they went to church and they had to walk to church, they would walk in their bare feet, and they wouldn't put these on till they got to church and then take them off, because they didn't want to wear them out because they might not get another pair. And I don't know how they afforded the children's, because they wouldn't stay in this size very long, and then they would have to get new ones. Hats were worn, bonnets were worn, something like what I have on. Yeah, this was a typical dress of the day. Over here we have a very special uniform. This was David Anderson's, actually Dr. Anderson's Civil War uniform. This is from the Civil War. This is what when he was in as a doctor in the Civil War, this is what he wore. And hopefully we will be able to preserve it, because it's a very old relic. And a lot of these tricorn hats were used in those days. Wore a hat like this. The ladies would wear bonnets and long dresses. Of course, you couldn't have your ankles and that showing. You had to get your dress way down there. And mostly, this is it about how the women dress. They might have a parasol, as we have over there, but this is how they would dress. And they had these combs for their hair, put in the hair. This is a brush. Here's an old brush from here. They would have something, some of them might have, it depends on whether they were good sewers or not, that they could make little things, little doilies and things to put in their bedroom. Fan. That's a pretty one. And pretty much that's it for the clothing. The men wore the, as I said, the knee to the knee and shirts. And a lot of times they were real baggy so they could put supplies in their shirts when they went out hunting. Okay, that's probably it for the clothing room. In the very early days, ladies, you were the ones that really had to work. Your husband had to bring home the food. He had to go out and shoot the deer or whatever. But it was up to you to make the clothes. Now, you couldn't go to the store and buy the material, so you had to make the material, and that was what was so hard. This shows the steps in making wool. It was like you had to shear this, get the sheep sheared, which maybe your husband would do, and then you had to card it to get all the dirt out of it and get it cleaned, and then you had to spin it and you had to get your thread. And then after you got your wool thread, you had to knit. You had to knit the socks, the mittens, and hopefully you would have a girl or two that could learn to do this with you, and would knit all these things for winter, and that was one of your jobs. Now what we have here on the wall, this is something made by the society, and it has names of all these people that lived in the area at one time. And I'm always very happy to see it because my father and my mother are both there. Elizabeth Van Voorst and Robert Van Voorst. And some of my other relatives are here too. But they made this. This is Historical Society made this, and they did a wonderful job. In 1967, I don't know whether that's when it was done or not, I don't know, but we hung it for that reason because it was such a nice thing. We have also turned the one room here that's upstairs, we have turned it into a library research room for people that are looking for things about their people that we might have something, we might not. If they were related to the ones that lived in this building, maybe, or we have some other things too about the history of this area that people might like to investigate. Charity Wright was the last of the Wrights to live in this house, and so we have this as the Charity Wright room. This was one of her quilts, I guess you would call it. It's not really quilted, but it's a spread that she had, and that was hers, and it has her name embroidered on it. And if you ever heard the saying that sleep tight, don't let the bed bugs bite, well, that's because of this. This bed has this. These ropes had to be tightened every so often because they would get loose. And the mattress was made of whatever they had, whether it was leaves or grass or whatever they put in there. And of course, there were bugs in it. So that's where the saying came from. Over here, we have one of the cradles for baby wood rocks that they would make out of wood, that would be carved out of wood. They would use, as I said before, a lot of wood. This is the staff, walking staff that they would have. They had, this is a little sleigh. Now if you notice, up here, downstairs we had very ornate fireplace, but here it's plain because visitors didn't come up here. So they just had the plain fireplace in every single room. So it was, first it was burning wood. And then later, when Dr. Anderson was here and owned the coal mines, he had coal, he burned coal. But to have heat in your room, you had to have a fireplace. And of course, I don't know whether you can get that over there or not. This is a uniform of, over here, an early uniform. Doctor's satchel here. Whoopsie. And that, you can tell this is old. Stay there. Satchel for the doctor. And let's see, anything else? Oh, the pitcher and the basin. You didn't have any water, running water. You had to bring your water up, the pitcher. And I think that's it for this room. The Charity Wright room. Well, that ends our tour. It was brief. I hope you will take time to come and see the house yourself because it means so much more. Located on Venetia Road? Venetia Road. I don't live here. I'm sure you'll be able to find it. It's pretty well known. And we'd love to have you come and take more time to live in the history of the past. Bye.